Hello, boys and girls. Let's keep reading the book Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold LaBelle. We are on chapter 2. This one is called The Story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I'm a frog." "Well, today you look very green." "Even for a frog," said Toad. "What do you think he meant by that?" What do you think Toad meant by frog is looking green? Do you ever feel like when you're sick, your stomach really hurts? You look like you just don't feel good. You look a little bit green, like you're gonna get sick. I think that's probably what he meant. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out to the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story. All right, so let's start thinking about the things that Toad is trying to do to think of a story. He went to the front porch. He walked up and down the front porch. He walked up and down the front porch for a long time. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "Well, I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me think of a story." Oh, so he went to the front porch and walked up and down. He could not think of a story. Now he's trying to stand on his head to think of a story. Do you think that will help? Toad stood on his head for a long time. He could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. What? So he walked up and down the front porch, stood on his head. Now he's pouring water all over his head. "Why are you pouring water on your head?" asked Frog. "Well, I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me think of a story," asked Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Don't do that. That sounds silly." "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "Well, I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it'll help me think of a story," said Toad. "Well, I'm feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I don't think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." "Why do you think Toad feels terrible now?" "Well, let's see. Is there anything that happened to him? Or why he feels so terrible?" He walked up and down the porch. He stood on his head, poured water on his head, then he banged his head on the wall. I think I would feel terrible too. Frog said, "Would you like for me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of one, so he walked up and down the porch. He could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he still could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end. "Oh, how is that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. All right, and that's the end of chapter 2. So how do you think that Frog was a good friend to Toad at the end of the story? He told him a story, didn't he? He told him a story to help him feel better. Can you think of ways to maybe tell a story? Could you think of any ways to tell a story? I know when I am telling a story to my son, I think of either something that really did happen and I tell him a real story, or I think of things that happen but then I make them kind of crazy and kind of fun. And that's a make-believe story. It's not real. It's things happen in it that wouldn't really happen, like I could fly, or he could drive a really fast car. He can't drive a car. He's only 3. Just things like that. Those are all ways to tell stories. Okay, go ahead and complete the questions and then go on to chapter 3.